You are listening to the Keenan Vision Podcast, produced by Salesforce DevOps.net. This is episode 6, broadcast Friday, February 25th, 2022. Watch out for those guardrails. An interview with Salesforce cybersecurity expert Waqas Nazir, CEO of DigitSec. Let's commit. Hey everybody, my name is Vernon Keenan. I'm the owner of Salesforce DevOps.net website. I'm the senior industry analyst there. And today I've got Waqas Nazir, who's the CEO and founder of DigitSec, which is a cybersecurity firm in the Salesforce world. So welcome, Waqas. How are you today?
I am doing great. Thank you, Vernon, for having me, and it's a pleasure to see you again.
Yes, it's a lovely day here on the west coast of America. So before we get going, why don't you tell me a little bit about how you got going with computers, like even as like a kid or, in high school or something. It's got to be some interesting story for a security engineer and entrepreneur getting started.
Yeah, that's a great question. And I wish I had an exciting story to share there. But my introduction to computers was through my profession. I grew up
Ah,
in a developing country in which the
mm-hmm.
two career choices that you had was one was engineering and the other was medicine. And those who were good at math went into engineering field, and those who were good at biology actually went into, the medicine field. So I did not romanticize with machines or computers as some other people would have coming
Right.
up in the West. I was good at math, so they figured put this guy in engineering. So I started studying computers as an engineer, and I got an engineering degree, which I traveled to the U.S. for as an exchange student, interestingly.
Uh-huh.
And the funny thing is that I had to create an email because that's the only way they would take assignments.
Right.
Before then, I was not communicating over email. And that was the first time I created an email because the professor said, email me your assignment. I was like, email me your assignment? What is that? So I had to figure out how to get an email, and that was my introduction into computers, and ever since kind of fell in love with what technology has to offer, and that is basically
So what
uh,
was like the first language you studied in college?
interestingly, I was doing chip design. So if you're
Ah,
familiar
huh.
with Able, Verilog,
Yep.
were the first few languages, and then C, C++, where we're writing drivers and a lot of native
Ah,
programming. And eventually, my first real job out of college was, working for the guys in Redmond, we call it Microsoft.
yes.
And that's when I was exposed to more of the managed stuff like .NET and C Sharp and stuff like that.
So when was this when you started at Microsoft?
So this was 2003, a
Mm-hmm.
long time ago.
Mm-hmm.
Uh, and it was interesting that I kind of stumbled into security because I had studied traditional engineering. I had done software engineering as well, but I had never studied cybersecurity, or there was actually no coursework at that time. It was all
Yeah.
about make strong passwords, right? And this
It,
was at the time when you know there was this blue screen of death, if you remember. If
of
you
course. It's kind
clicked
of
on
the
the right,
color of my shirt, I think, actually.
yeah, yeah, and it still, I've heard it still can happen. It's pretty rare, but
Mm-hmm.
that was quite normal back in the day.
The
And
good
that
old
was basically,
BSOD, right?
yeah, exactly. And that's when Microsoft started to get serious about security, and I was lucky enough to be there at that time.
Ah,
And that's when, I don't know if you remember, but Bill Gates said that there was a required reading for every engineer at Microsoft, and the book's name was Writing Secure Code. So it was basically, we're getting beat up all the time by hackers, and we got to up our game. And that's how Microsoft did, was like a lot of education of their developers and creating a standard across the board.
And then from that point, you've gone on to a consulting career and other things before DigitSec, right?
Yeah, I worked for a bank for a little while, experience how it's like to work for a financial institution, and it was
Mm-hmm.
a lot of fun in seeing how the financial world works. Um, and then I did some audit work with a firm as a consultant, and then eventually I charted my own path with DigitSec.
Ah, so I that kind of just makes me want to jump into DigitSec a little bit and make you ask, what is, if I'm a Salesforce platform owner and I've got a big Salesforce platform in front of me, there's got to be a lot of cyber threats ranging from personal identified information to data access issues to code issues. I mean, how the heck do I get my arms around all that stuff?
Yeah, I think as a platform owner for Salesforce, first step I think is to realize that you have some responsibility when it comes to security. And unless you come to that realization, there's little to nothing you can do about it. So anything that you do on top of the platform, whether it's customizing it by writing new code, by writing new workflows, by creating new integrations, by even integrating out of the box products, right? All those that are done by you as a consumer of Salesforce, you are ultimately responsible for. Um, and once you realize that, then you'll know that, hey, Salesforce is more than a SaaS. I can actually write code and deploy it, and it will run on the server side, and it will have unfettered access to all my data. So what do I have to do to make sure that that code is secure, right?
Mm-hmm. So,
When when
I think what you're talking about there, if I could just jump in to excitedly jump in and mention how this obviously dovetails with why Salesforce DevOps and Salesforce is more popular nowadays, is because people are jumping onto Salesforce as a platform for digital transformation. So that it's linking into all these systems, and it's got secure data in it for critical systems.
Exactly. Yep. And it has become more than just CRM, right? You have to understand that. It's
Way
become
more.
sort of this like framework that's being deployed to solve different unique problems across the enterprise now, right? And unless you take that platform approach and you're not still drinking the Kool-Aid of fix not code, you will not tackle this problem, right? Um, and I think that to me is the best starting point. And
Mm-hmm.
then
Mm.
understanding like what type of data that we have in Salesforce, how is it being accessed, who is accessing it, creating sort of a threat profile for your environment, and then
Right.
addressing like what are our needs and what can we do to address those needs would be the right approach.
I think that gets into a key element of cybersecurity in general, which is that to have a cybersecurity program where you're, taking care, thinking about threats and dealing with them inside or out, you have to know what you're protecting. So there's like a whole management process that goes along with that. Can you talk a little bit more about that?
Yeah, so there are quite a few frameworks that are already available if you are interested in implementing a program. I always say you don't do cybersecurity with tooling, you do it with a program. So you have to have a program in place which defines here are the key activities which we will do to ensure that whatever we push on this platform is secure, right? And that is driven out of the program. For example, one discipline is secure design, right?
Hmm.
Is reviewing the design of what you're developing, if it's secure or not, right? Unless you have that element as part of your process, you may end up creating something which may not have any code related bugs, but fundamentally flawed from a design perspective, right? So, unless you use a program based approach, and you can use like the Microsoft's SDL, which given my background is a given that I'll recommend that. But there are other,
Hmm.
open source approaches to software security or platform security that could be used. For example, the OWASP's standard around application security, ASVS, I think it's called, can be utilized, which is open source, focused towards web applications, and Salesforce is a web-based platform, and much of that is relevant to Salesforce development. So I would say like having that basis is
Hmm.
is a must-have, because if you start throwing tools at the problem or throwing people at the problem, hey, you do design review, you do code review, there's nothing that's bringing this together. You'll do it perhaps haphazardly,
Right.
and eventually either people will move on, or if there's change in roles, you'll have to basically create that again. But if you create the program and then you put in the people, processes and technologies together, then you will have a sustainable model which you can actually improve over time, right? You may want to take things out which are cumbersome for you, given your use case. So I think one size doesn't fit all, but you should have some size, right? You can't just go with the flow.
Right. So that it's a you're talking about a common theme with that you and I and our friends Andrew Davis and Ian Gotts and so forth. We talk about how it's DevOps is so much more a management function than tooling or things or platforms. And I'm wondering, are you seeing that adoption actually happening out there?
I think everybody's in a different curve.
Mm-hmm.
Um, for some people, the primary driver for DevOps is a pain point that they're trying to solve with their releases, right? It's very hard to make releases, and that's how they stumble into this practice of DevOps. For
Right.
some, it's getting a wrap around business requirements, right? We build something and we present it and then say, oh, this is not what we wanted, right? So they're coming in from a business standpoint. So all these like little problems have made people aware of DevOps as a practice, and
Mm-hmm.
they are applying DevOps to solve their like specific problem. They're still not getting the big vision, right? Of if you wanted to do continuous delivery on Salesforce, what does it look like, right? What are some of the key elements that you must have to make sure that your business requirements are getting, bought in properly, and your tooling is such that when release days come, you're not breaking like environments 50 times before you can ship something, right?
Right.
um, and I think I see this the adoption, and I think you're probably better suited to give that opinion as well, is that people are approaching DevOps to solve very specific problems, and they're sometimes able to
Yeah.
solve it, and then they say we have DevOps now. We've mastered
Mm.
business requirement gathering, or our release days are really short now, so we're doing great. Um, they may be missing like critical elements of DevOps as a result, but they would since they weren't pain points, they're not going to address them until they become a pain point. So that's my humble observation, but of course you can have some more insights
Well,
on that.
let's talk about a glorious future in a little bit. But for the moment, let's kind of like stay in the pipeline and think about you know if we're doing good cybersecurity in a DevOps pipeline like the Capado pipelines or something like that. Where does DigitSec, like for example, how does it fit into that kind of pipeline? the whole process of a release management cycle.
Yeah, so we basically address the security of Salesforce environments holistically, right? If you look at Salesforce, it can be pretty complicated, right? You have different um, types of um, access models, which is unique to each environment. You have different types of data in each environment. You have different types of workflows and integrations, which are unique to each environment. And then you can have completely unique piece of code interacting with that data. So we've taken this approach that either you can like try to piecemeal a solution, like for example, to manage configurations, you can have one solution, or to manage the security of your code, you can have one solution, or to manage like third-party risk, you can have another solution. So we said that why not one solution? It's one platform, so why not create one solution which addresses these key elements, which is not everything, but at least from a threat perspective, it'll give you a full picture, right? Because you still have monitoring and things like that, which we don't do, right? But there's like event monitoring that's provided by Shield and stuff like that, which can be utilized for that aspect of Salesforce. So
For data
our
access issues management
yeah.
primarily.
Mhm. Yep. So our take has been take the Salesforce environment as a whole and then plug the right tool at the right moment so that you get the best value out of it, right? For example, you want to do code analysis as soon as possible, right? And as soon as possible in the dev world is the IDE, right? You want
Right.
to
Good.
developers to use that as part of their daily workflow. But you cannot just simply rely on that control, right? When something is built into your pipeline, let's say from dev to test, you want to have some sanity checks there, right? To make sure that not only is the analysis being done earlier, but things have been fixed as well, right? So you're
Right.
not shipping down the pipeline with bugs, right? And we all know, right, the graph that goes up like this, that the further along a bug goes, the higher it is, in terms of cost and time to
That's right.
fix,
That's
right?
right.
So you don't want bugs going down, and pre-production is the time where you say, let's do security testing now, right? And that would basically be a very ineffective way of doing security now, right?
Right.
Because
Like for example, if you wanted to do, I guess it's you wanted to have two-factor authentication on VPN vendor access to the Colonial pipeline system before
mhm,
that problem happened.
yes, yeah, absolutely. So going back and fixing things is like trying to undo something and create it from pretty much sometimes from scratch, right? Because if you did not build in, even like Salesforce started enforcing 2FA recently, right? So you can just
Yes.
imagine like some of these older systems, it's like virtually impossible, right? That you could have controls like 2FA on industrial control systems. If you talk about that, somebody's going to be like, hey, we have the same password, by the way, across all devices. So let us change our passwords first, and then we'll talk about 2FA, right? And that stems from this notion that security needs to be done when it becomes a pain, right? When somebody's knocking down the door, somebody's already broken in,
Right.
and hey, let's
And it's already
go.
too late, obviously.
Exactly. Yep.
I think that just reinforces how much I call it cybersecurity because I want to make it scary because there's a lot of threats out there, and if you don't mitigate the cyber threats, somehow you're taking too much risk.
Yep.
I think it's really that kind of simple, and I look at things like DigitSec as a risk management tool to some degree.
Mhm.
So take us back on that little journey we were going through the Capado pipeline there.
Yeah. So basically, we want to be like empowering the folks who are responsible ultimately, like the
Hmm.
architects and the developers and the admins, to have some guardrails, right? When
Right.
they're producing these, to aptly use one of your, articles headlines, is to basically do their job but not mess up, right? And those guardrails will be produced by using tooling like ours, which enables them to find issues earlier and to learn from those findings so that they don't actually produce them in future, right? Eventually, in an ideal world, our solution would be there, but it would not be creating any work, technically speaking, for the developers or admins, or be so less that only new things are popped up, right? So
Right.
the things that they know of are not existent in their environment, and that would be a wonderful scenario, like a utopian uh, dream or something, right? But that's eventually what we want, is like once you're plugged into the pipeline, your pipeline progresses through analytics. And at a time, you can say we've actually eliminated complete classes of
Right.
bugs
Right.
in our pipeline
Right.
altogether, right? So when we ship, we don't have XYZ ever because of our practices now, right? Because it was being flagged by our tooling. And that I think is a great measure of success for somebody who's implementing Capado as part of their, release management.
So that you're actually measuring your success as you go along, so that you know you're actually succeeding.
Hmm. Absolutely.
To,
And it's this is like security is one of those things, like you can say we've made it faster, right? We
right.
made it more
Right.
accurate, but in the end of the day, it is gonna find things, right? That's just the nature of the beast, right? So making a pure um, business related argument is pretty hard, right?
Hmm.
The best business related argument is like not having security, right? Because it's gonna make you do things which would, if you didn't have to do, would slow you down, right?
Right.
Um, but in the long run, it's going to save you a lot of heartache. It's going to save you potentially
I don't see
if
how you can take the risk nowadays. I mean, like I mentioned in that article, where I guess the analogy is, we're talking about the dark reading article where the title is Salesforce DevOps needs guardrails. So the analogy is, let's say you're the owner of a shiny new Salesforce org, and you've got it souped up like a sports car, and you're driving around Mulholland Drive in Los Angeles, and you're like, you want to go real fast, so you got your nitrous bottle, and you got your extra hot rod carburetor on the top, so you just floor the thing with capabilities, and you're going to go flying off the cliff eventually. And I think that's what you're saying. DigitSec gives low code users and other users of Salesforce a better ability to use those tools safely because you're checking up on them, essentially.
exactly, you definitely need, like you said, those safety nets or guardrails when you are developing in low code environments, because assuming that you cannot mess up is a very dangerous assumption, right? And unfortunately, we've seen firsthand that it does cause a lot of problems, and we've seen like people have to completely take their instances offline, like get the DNS entries removed because it was that bad, right? And you don't want to be in that situation where a core piece of platform in your enterprise is taken offline because of a security issue, right? And that's no fun, and we don't want any of our customers to go through that.
I think that happens more than people hear about because a lot of these smaller incidents never hit the headlines, but it still impacts large
Mhm.
orgs.
Yep, it does. Yep.
Okay, so we're getting towards the end here, and I always want to ask our guests to give the audience some advice about how to maybe get a job in information security, perhaps, or how to, if you're developing your career in this area, what kind of advice do you give to like someone who's trying to get ahead?
Yeah, it's a very good question. And I think I can speak from my experience that the best way to learn cybersecurity is to do hands on exercises. There are a lot of good resources available. For example, there's the Webcode project, which allows you to go through and exploit a web application, a typical web application. So if you're interested in like web app security, that's a great way of doing it. If you're interested in mobile security, there's this um, framework called Diva, which is basically a really bad app that you go into the motions of hacking into, um, and that allows you to build that skill set. Because in security, there are, I would say, like two broad categories at the engineering level of skills, right? One is someone who is well versed in a lot of tools. They can run a lot of tooling and then analyze their output and then provide some insights to customers. But then there's the more niche group of individuals who actually can find things which end up in the tools, right? So these are the ones who are actually doing actual analysis of products and things like that, and they're finding like unique bugs. And for that, you need to have a really good understanding of the technology that you're assessing. So the recommendation that I made around going to WebGoat or going to Diva and actually doing hands-on is like invaluable like experience. So if you pick up skills that way, you'll be much more valuable than, hey, I know how to run like a scanner, or I know how to run a security tool of this and I can understand the output. That I think is valuable nonetheless, but not as much as somebody who understands the underlying technology can actually can find more unique issues if they were assessing that technology.
So
And
you
then there,
need your own personal laboratory. Sounds like with test
well,
subjects.
yeah, I would say I think the best way to learn security is by doing it, right? Um,
Hmm.
you can have certifications, you can have all these other credentials which will help you in your career, but in the end of the day, if you're wanting to be a cybersecurity engineer and do like real cybersecurity, then you need to get your hands dirty, right? You need to know how to break into a system and for the good of people, right? So that's the one thing that you would understand is once you grasp the skill set, you have the ability to sometimes penetrate networks and applications, but being responsible with that skill set is also very important because um, at the end of the day you're doing this to earn a living and also help companies who may have security bugs which can be exploited by hackers and cause problems for them.
Yeah, I think to be a white hat, you have to learn how to beat the black hats. It's kind of one of the basic tenets. And as a service provider and as a person who for decades has had the keys to many people's kingdoms, I think you just have to be professional. And one way to think of yourself is like you're somebody's priest or their lawyer or their wife or something. It's like you have to be that level of discretion and trust when you're helping people
Exactly.
like that.
Yeah, you have to be 100% like 100% consummate professional, right? So the level of things that you will see or find and then keeping them confidential and making sure that they get addressed is like paramount. So you have to beat the black hats without being one, right? And it's very hard because when you have the ability to break into systems and stuff like that, it can be tempting, right? So you have to get that in your mind
Right.
that I'm doing this for the right reason, not for the wrong reason, right? So
If only the NSA paid more, then.
yeah, but they do teach you good. So that's another way of getting into cybersecurity. if you can get
Just to
into
get
NSA.
recruited into the NSA or some, probably a military route as well is probably another way to
Yep,
go.
yep.
Especially the Israeli military, from what I hear. That's a good route. Okay, Waqas. I will. This is wonderful. I feel like we're just keep talking, but it's the end of the podcast today, and just want to say thank you very much, and to thank the audience. And we'll see you the next time on the Keenan Vision Podcast. Thank you.
Thank you. It's a pleasure, Vernon. Take care.
You're welcome. Bye-bye. Thank you for listening to this edition of the Keenan Vision Podcast. You can get more information about DigitSec from their website, which is digitsec.com. You can reach Waqas Nazir on LinkedIn by his username spelled WAQASNAZIR. Please come visit the SalesforceDevOps.net website and sign up for email notifications of significant updates. Thanks to 10 Ton Chicken for the music, which is available on iTunes. And be sure to like, subscribe, and leave a review about how we did on this podcast. See you next time.